welcome to another highly anticipated edition of our deep dive.
Glad to be here for this one.
Yeah, right out of the gate, I want to throw out a very specific, very intentional welcome to you, the listener. Today, we are speaking directly to men's rights advocates. Those of you who consider yourselves aligned with the red-pilled manosphere.
Right.
And frankly, anyone out there who is, deeply interested in understanding the traditional history of our societal institutions.
Specifically, how they functioned and thrived before the modern influence of feminism and cultural Marxism really took hold of the narrative.
Exactly. So if you find yourself nodding along to that, or if you're just insanely curious about the fault lines fracturing our modern culture, you have found exactly the right place to be today.
It is undeniably a cultural flashpoint. I mean, the topics we're going to explore today generate a massive amount of heated discussion across every corner of the internet.
Oh, absolutely.
And because of that heat, it requires a very careful, highly methodical approach to truly understand the underlying architecture of the arguments being presented.
Yeah, we have to look past the surface level shouting and actually examine the foundational ideas.
We do.
And that is exactly our mission for today's deep dive. We are going to thoroughly, painstakingly unpack a fascinating new ebook.
It's a heavy one.
It really is. It's titled The Vulnerable Vessel, A Tale of Strength and Resilience, written by Conrad Reicher.
Right.
We're going to provide an ultra-long, highly incisive look into the core arguments of this book. The goal is to hook you, the listener, and really give you a comprehensive 360-degree understanding of what Reicher is putting forward.
Because it's a dense read.
Yeah, it's dense, so we're going to break it down piece by piece.
Yeah.
But before we get into the absolute meat of it, we do need to set the stage properly.
Yes, and just to set the expectations for you listening, this book touches what many consider the third rail of modern culture. It deals heavily with gender ideology, modern feminism, traditional gender roles, and the concept of cultural Marxism.
Very charged topic.
Highly charged, because that subject matter is inherently politically charged. Our goal today isn't to tell you whether Reicher is objectively right or wrong.
Right. We're not taking sides here.
Exactly. We aren't here to endorse his viewpoints, and we certainly aren't here to condemn them. We're simply acting as your impartial, objective guides. We want to lay out his arguments, his historical interpretations, and his theories as clearly and accurately as possible, so you can weigh the evidence and evaluate it entirely for yourself.
Perfectly framed. We are just the guides mapping out the territory. You are the jury making the final call.
Exactly.
Now, before we open up chapter 1 and get into the weeds, I want to remind you to please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel.
It really helps.
It is the single best way to help us keep bringing you these ultra-long, detailed, and completely unfiltered breakdowns. And I can promise you, if you find yourself hooked by what we discussed today, and I suspect you will, you definitely need to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the ebook, The Vulnerable Vessel, for yourself.
And just to add to that, if you want to follow the author's ongoing work, his daily insights, and how he expands on these philosophies in real time, I highly advise you to follow him directly.
Definitely.
You can find him at Conrad Reicher, that's Conrad and Reicher, over at Substack. It's a great companion to the source material we're reviewing today.
All right, let's dive right in. Reicher kicks the book off by identifying what he considers to be the absolute central paradox facing men in the 21st century.
He calls it the modern man's dilemma.
Right, and it entirely revolves around this concept of the double bind.
Yeah, the double bind.
According to Reicher, men today are essentially being ordered by society to be two completely contradictory things at the exact same time.
Which is impossible.
Right. On one hand, they are demanded to be the traditional rocks of the family, strong, stoic, unshakable providers. But simultaneously, usually from the exact same cultural voices, they are relentlessly pressured to be openly vulnerable, emotionally expressive, and deeply sensitive.
What's incredibly fascinating about how Reicher approaches this is his use of modern pop culture to illustrate the trap.
Yeah, the celebrity examples.
Exactly. He doesn't just speak in abstract psychological terms. He points directly to figures like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Ryan Gosling.
Right.
These are men who are highly praised in the mainstream media specifically for displaying vulnerability. You see the magazine covers praising them for crying in an interview or talking openly about their deepest insecurities.
Yeah, they get applauded for it.
They do. And because of this massive media amplification, Reicher argues that society projects this expectation onto the everyday man. It creates this totally false narrative that all men everywhere will be universally rewarded, praised, and actually deemed stronger if they just drop their guard, open up, and weep.
But Riker makes a very sharp pivot here. He points out that everyday men are not A-list movie stars.
No, they are not.
They don't have millions of dollars in the bank and a team of publicists protecting their image.
Right.
To really drive this reality home, the author shares a very poignant, grounded anecdote about a guy named Michael.
Ah, yes, the Michael story.
Michael is described as a highly successful entrepreneur, a dedicated father of two, and basically the pillar of strength for everyone in his orbit.
His employees, his wife, his kids.
Exactly. But then the economy shifts.
Yeah.
And he faces a series of severe compounding business setbacks.
Yeah.
And for the first time in his adult life, Michael feels incredibly vulnerable and terrified about the future. But what does he actually do?
He hides it.
He hides it. He completely buries it. He is absolutely terrified to share these very real feelings with his family or his professional peers.
Because he has a deep-seated fear that the moment he does, it will be instantly read as a fatal sign of weakness. And if we pull back and look at the mechanics of this from Riker's perspective, the psychological toll of this catch-22 is just devastating.
It really is.
On one hand, society and Riker explicitly notes, often women in these men's lives demands emotional openness. The constant refrain is, talk to me, be vulnerable, don't hold it in.
We hear that all the time.
All the time. But on the exact other hand, Riker argues that when everyday men actually do take that leap of faith and show genuine vulnerability, they are very often met with scorn, subtle ridicule, or they are outright professionally penalized.
Yeah, they lose respect.
Riker's thesis here is that men aren't naturally closed off. Rather, they quickly and painfully learn through experience that vulnerability is a double-edged sword, and it almost always cuts them.
And it seems to be entirely context dependent, right?
Very much so.
It's not that vulnerability is always punished, but the arena matters immensely.
No.
Riker brings up another personal anecdote about his college friend, Jake.
Right, the bar story.
Yeah. They are out having a few beers, just the two of them, and Jake finally opens up about his severe, crippling struggles with clinical anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
In that specific context, two guys sitting at a bar, bonding in a fraternal environment, the vulnerability actually worked. It deepened their friendship. Riker writes that he genuinely respected Jake more for having the sheer guts to be honest about the demons he was fighting.
Precisely. But the source material sharply contrasts that safe, fraternal, male-to-male environment with the highly competitive arenas of modern life.
Like the workplace.
Yes, the workplace. Riker points out that in the corporate workplace, or during a highly contentious divorce or legal separation, that exact same vulnerability can and absolutely will be weaponized against a man.
He uses some very stark hypotheticals for that.
He does, and they resonate with a lot of men. If a man breaks down and cries at work under the pressure of a massive project, the modern HR department might send him to therapy. But the executive board is secretly noting that he is too unstable for the VP promotion. Or if a man shows deep emotional fragility during a divorce mediation, opposing counsel will ruthlessly use that emotional display to question his fundamental fitness as a reliable parent. This is the invisible tightrope. Riker says men are being forced to walk every single day.
It's a lose-lose scenario, and he backs this up with hard data. The book cites a highly publicized 2018 study from the American Psychological Association.
The APA.
Right. This study made waves because it linked traditional masculine norms to depression. But Riker digs deeper into the methodology and the why behind it.
He argues that depression doesn't stem from being traditionally masculine.
Right, he says the depression spikes specifically when men feel completely trapped by these conflicting expectations.
Yes.
They are told by their biology and history to be stoic providers, but modern culture tells them they are fundamentally toxic if they aren't bleeding their emotions everywhere.
And yet, when they try to play by the new rules and be emotional, they lose the respect of their peers and partners.
So what does a man do? Riker says they just isolate themselves. They pull away entirely, leading to this massive silent epidemic of severe anxiety and depression.
Which naturally begs a massive sociological question. How does society categorize and label the men who inevitably fail to perfectly navigate this impossible, contradictory tightrope?
Because it is impossible to be both an unshakable rock and a hypersensitive emotional sponge simultaneously.
Exactly. When men fail at this, Riker notes, they aren't met with empathy. Instead, they get slapped with the very specific, highly weaponized, modern buzzword.
And that buzzword is toxic masculinity.
There it is.
This is a huge pivot in the book where Riker takes this ubiquitous term and completely deconstructs its premise. He argues for a total ground-up redefinition of what we're actually looking at.
According to his framework, toxic masculinity is not some inherent biological flaw in men. It's not a virus that infects the male brain.
Right.
Rather, the term itself is just a mechanism. It represents the systemic cultural shaming of men for not perfectly fulfilling a set of wildly conflicting societal roles that were designed to be unachievable in the first place.
Riker posits that modern society sets up this impossible standard, and when a man naturally, inevitably struggles to meet it, society doesn't look in the mirror and say, maybe our expectations are completely broken.
Instead, society blames the man's gender. It calls his very nature toxic.
To build this argument, the author doesn't just look at modern Twitter discourse. He traces the historical and modern roots of misandry, which, for you listening, is defined as the ingrained prejudice or outright hatred against men.
The historical context he unearths here is pretty wild. He goes all the way back to ancient Greece to prove that this isn't just a 21st century phenomenon.
Yeah, the Aristotle anecdote.
Right. Most people view Aristotle as the father of logic. But Riker points out that Aristotle actually claimed that women were naturally more compassionate and surprisingly more rational in their emotional processing than men, whom he viewed as prone to destructive passions.
So Riker is using this to point out that the idea of men being somehow inherently flawed, emotionally stunted, or less evolved has deep, deep historical roots. It's an old narrative wearing new clothes.
And transitioning from ancient Greek philosophy to the modern hyper-connected day, Riker outlines what he specifically terms the feminization of society.
And he defines this very carefully.
He does. He argues that the rise of modern intersectional feminism, coupled with the systemic march of cultural Marxism through our institutions, has intentionally worked to blur and erase traditional gender roles.
With an end goal.
Yes, so the end goal of this, according to the text, is the widespread emasculation of men, making them more compliant and less disruptive to a managed technocratic society.
He gets incredibly personal in this section, which makes the theory feel very grounded. Riker uses his own father as the primary example of this generational whiplash.
That was a powerful part of the book.
It really was. He describes his dad as a very traditional, strong, blue-collar provider, a man who was literally built psychologically and physically for a different era. But as society rapidly shifted beneath his feet in the late 90s and 2000s, his father was suddenly forced to try and conform to this newly minted, highly sensitive corporate norm.
And Riker describes the palpable, quiet distress it caused his father.
Right. Here's a man who showed his profound love for his family by breaking his back, working 50 hours a week, and fiercely protecting his home. Suddenly, he's being told by daytime television, by HR departments, and by the culture at large that his specific way of being a man was not just outdated, but morally wrong.
What's crucial to understand about Riker's argument here is how he breaks down the systemic, inescapable nature of these misandrous narratives.
Yeah, it's not just a few angry people on the internet.
Exactly. He argues forcefully that this isn't just happening in individual households or passing arguments between couples, it is deeply institutional. He points the finger directly at the media apparatus. He notes that if you look at modern movies, television sitcoms, and even commercials, men are now almost exclusively portrayed in one of two ways. They are either highly aggressive, violent brutes who need to be restrained by society, or they are bumbling, incompetent, overgrown children who can't figure out how to do laundry and constantly need to be saved by a hyper-competent, smarter female counterpart.
The idiot dad trope in every single sitcom for the last 20 years.
Precisely.
But he doesn't stop at Hollywood. He takes a very hard, critical look at the systems that actually govern our lives. The education system and the legal system.
Family courts, especially.
Yeah. Riker highlights the legal system as being particularly, almost aggressively biased. He argues that men are routinely treated as second-class citizens, especially when they enter family courts.
He points to the horrific reality of modern child custody battles and divorce cases, where the default assumption, the starting line, often heavily favors the mother, entirely regardless of the individual facts of the case or the competence of the father.
He paints a picture of a system that leaves men financially decimated and emotionally alienated from their own children.
And to quantify this crisis of identity, to prove he isn't just speaking from personal grievance, the source material quotes data from a major 2019 Pew Research Center study.
The numbers on that were striking.
They show that 42% of men in the United States feel a significant daily pressure from society to conform to traditional masculine standards, to provide, to protect, to lead while being simultaneously told by that exact same society that those standards are inherently toxic.
Riker argues that living in that state of constant cognitive dissonance directly leads to the massive crisis of self-worth, the spiking suicide rates, and the collapsing mental health we see among men today.
So the natural question for you, the listener, is how does a man actually fight back against a narrative that is this pervasive?
Riker doesn't just diagnose the problem, he offers a tactical strategy to combat it.
Right. First, he says you have to intellectually disarm the attacks by identifying the logical fallacies being used against you.
He specifically points to the hasty generalization fallacy.
Yes.
This is what happens when modern culture takes the horrific actions of a tiny fraction of truly violent or terrible men and hastily generalizes that all men, by virtue of their testosterone, are inherently violent or oppressive.
Riker says a man's first line of defense is to spot that intellectual laziness and wholly reject it.
Furthermore, he suggests using humor as a shield and a weapon to disarm these overly serious accusatory narratives.
But critically, he emphasizes the absolute necessity of finding positive, unapologetic role models. Men who embrace their masculinity without asking for permission or offering apologies.
The text specifically names figures like the fitness influencer Mike Thurston, who promotes physical excellence and discipline.
As well as massive public commentators like Dr. Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, and Tucker Carlson.
Right. And regardless of what one thinks of their politics, Riker views these specific men as prime examples of individuals who have adamantly refused to apologize for their traditional masculine traits: competence, aggression, debate, and physical presence.
And have actually found immense, unprecedented success specifically because of those traits, not in spite of them.
Okay, let's follow Riker's logic down the rabbit hole here. If the current societal push to completely feminize men and blur all gender lines is fundamentally flawed and causing this massive psychological crisis, what is the natural baseline?
Right. Where do we look for the truth?
Exactly. If society has it wrong, where should we be looking for the objective truth about how men and women should interact? That incredibly loaded question takes us into section 3 of the book, where Riker asserts we must strip away sociology and look purely at biology, confronting what he calls the dangerous myth of complete equality.
This is undeniably one of the most provocative sections of the text, and it's where Riker makes his most uncompromising assertions.
He states, quite plainly, that complete identical gender equality is a mathematical impossibility.
He isn't talking about equality of legal rights or inherent human dignity. He is insisting that men and women are fundamentally, biologically, and psychologically different.
Right. He argues these differences are hardwired into our physical structure, the terrain of our emotional processing, and most crucially, our evolutionary reproductive roles.
To ground this in undeniable reality, he uses a very clear, universally understood example: Usain Bolt, the fastest man in recorded human history.
Yes, the Usain Bolt comparison.
Riker points out that Usain Bolt's unprecedented success on the track is directly, inextricably tied to his unique biological and physiological makeup as a human male.
We are talking about the specific density of his bones, the ratio of fast-twitch muscle fibers, his sheer lung capacity, and the way testosterone processes in his body.
These are strictly male biological traits pushed to the absolute extreme edge of human potential. Riker states bluntly that women simply cannot replicate that level of speed and explosive physical strength, no matter how hard they train, purely because their biology is constructed differently.
And he emphasizes that this is not a value judgment about who is better or worse. It is simply an objective acknowledgement that we are built differently for different evolutionary purposes.
If we extrapolate this biological reality to the broader societal level, Riker uses this foundation to argue vehemently against what he terms enforced equality.
Right.
He posits that constructing a society that pushes men to act like women, demanding they be overly emotional, passive, and agreeable, and conversely pushing women to act like men, demanding they be highly aggressive, cutthroat, and physically dominant, is not just unnatural, it is actively and systematically dangerous.
The example he uses to illustrate the danger of enforced equality is the integration of military frontline combat roles.
A very contentious topic.
Yeah. Riker argues that in a misguided, politically motivated quest to prove that men and women can perform identical roles across every single sphere of life, the military has systematically had to lower its objective physical fitness standards to allow women to pass infantry and special forces training.
He argues passionately that in a life or death situation where pure physical strength, endurance under load, and the ability to drag a 200-pound wounded man in full gear out of a firefight are the only things keeping a unit alive, choosing to ignore objective biology in the name of political correctness fundamentally compromises the safety, lethality, and effectiveness of the entire military force.
So, if demanding identical equality is a dangerous fallacy, what exactly is Riker's alternative? How does he envision a functioning society?
He advocates for a total return to the concept of complementary roles.
Complementary roles.
Yes. In his framework, men are naturally biologically primed to be analytical, aggressive, and built by millions of years of evolution to protect the perimeter and provide resources.
And women, conversely, are naturally predisposed to be intuitive, highly empathetic, and built to nurture and sustain the internal community.
Riker's core message to you, the listener, is that embracing these innate biological differences, rather than constantly fighting a war against them, is the only actual key to achieving long-term societal harmony.
He argues that recognizing this difference isn't a form of patriarchal oppression, it's synergy. It is literally two different halves interlocking to make a stable, functioning whole.
I want to focus on how he applies this to the modern corporate landscape, because he takes this concept of complementary roles right into the boardroom.
Right. He contrasts two very different, highly visible approaches to female leadership to prove his point. On one hand, you have Sheryl Sandberg's massive cultural phenomenon, the book Lean In.
Yeah.
Riker interprets the Lean In philosophy as essentially pushing women to adopt traditionally male, highly aggressive, assertive traits in order to succeed in the corporate hierarchy. He views this as asking women to act like men.
But then he sharply contrasts that approach with the career of Mary Barra, the CEO of General Motors.
Yes, the Mary Barra example is pivotal for Riker.
He points to her as the ultimate success story of someone utilizing complementary roles. General Motors is a massively complex, historically male-dominated, heavy industry company. Riker claims that Barra succeeded at the absolute highest levels, not by trying to emulate a ruthless, aggressive male CEO, but by specifically leveraging her unique, innate female perspective and strengths, her high-level intuition, her ability to foster complex collaboration, and her empathetic management of massive teams.
He uses her career to prove that acknowledging biological differences doesn't mean women can't lead massive institutions. It means they lead differently, bringing different necessary tools to the table. And that specific difference should be celebrated and utilized, not erased in the pursuit of making everyone act exactly the same.
Which naturally leads us to ask, if Riker believes these biological differences are hardwired and complementary, how does he map that onto the actual building of human history?
Because he makes a pretty bold claim about who exactly built the world we live in.
He dedicates a massive portion of the book to exploring the history of our institutions before they were, as he puts it, captured by modern egalitarian ideologies.
He does. Riker is adamant that we must look at history through the lens of masculine responsibility. He details how male ambition, aggression, and protective instincts have fundamentally shaped the laws, governance, and physical infrastructure of the world since the absolute dawn of human civilization.
He takes the reader on a historical tour. He points to ancient Sumer and the creation of the first written laws,
The architectural and organizational marvels of the Egyptian pharaohs,
and the unmatched logistical and military supremacy of the Roman Empire. In all these cases, male leadership was the undisputed norm.
And Riker argues this wasn't due to some arbitrary patriarchal conspiracy to hold women down. It was driven by the harsh biological necessity of men acting as the expendable protectors and order creators in a deeply unforgiving, brutal world.
And he doesn't just stick to the ancient world, he traces this lineage of male institution building right up through the modern era, listing very specific foundational milestones of human progress.
He points to the Magna Carta, which laid the very groundwork for modern concepts of liberty and law,
The drafting of the U.S. Constitution,
the creation of the Napoleonic Code.
and even the founding of the first major universities in Europe. Riker makes it a point to highlight that all of these monumental leaps forward for human civilization, the frameworks that we still rely on today, were envisioned, fiercely debated, drafted, and physically executed by men.
The author is very careful to explain the mechanics of why male leadership was the historical default. He argues that male leadership provided the necessary stability, physical security, and forward progress required to survive.
He cites historical titans like Augustus Caesar, George Washington, and Winston Churchill.
Right. Riker argues that their specific leadership styles were heavily grounded in traditional masculine virtues, unyielding duty, emotional stoicism in the face of disaster, and a capacity for strategic calculated aggression.
According to the book, those specific masculine traits were exactly what was required to build, defend, and save civilizations when they were on the brink of collapse.
And he brings this argument right to the present day to challenge his critics. Riker looks at modern statistics regarding who runs the world right now. He notes that even today, nearly 80% of Fortune 500 CEOs are men.
He points out that men massively overwhelmingly dominate the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math.
Now, if you listen to modern sociologists or feminist critics, they would call this disparity the direct result of systemic oppression, unequal opportunity, or toxic male dominance keeping women out.
But Riker completely flips that script. He attributes this massive overrepresentation at the top not to oppression, but to innate biological male psychological traits.
He points to a biologically higher propensity for extreme risk-taking, a natural assertiveness, a willingness to work 80-hour weeks at the expense of social balance, and a deep-seated evolutionary sense of duty to conquer challenges.
However, it is very important to note that Riker doesn't just advocate for blind, tyrannical male authority. He doesn't think just being a man makes you a good leader.
Right. He spends a significant amount of time analyzing the highly delicate dance of effective leadership. He argues that a true masculine leader must perfectly balance ultimate, unquestioned authority with a highly calibrated sense of necessary empathy.
The two CEO anecdotes he shares in the book highlight this balancing act perfectly. First, he tells the story of a highly empathetic, modern CEO.
Yeah, this guy cared so deeply about his team's feelings, their mental health days, and their consensus that he became completely paralyzed. He couldn't make the hard, unpopular decisions required to keep the business competitive.
He let his empathy completely override his authority. And what happened? The project stalled, the company bled money, and he ultimately failed as a leader, costing people their jobs.
But on the exact flip side of that coin, Riker describes a highly domineering, old-school boss who ruled his department entirely by fear, intimidation, and raw authority, with absolute zero empathy for his workers.
He got immediate short-term results, sure, but he completely lost his team's loyalty, turnover skyrocketed, and his department eventually imploded from the inside out.
Riker says true, effective masculine leadership is finding that razor-thin sweet spot in the middle, having the strengths to make the hard call, but the wisdom to understand the people executing it.
Now, if we take this historical and structural view of male leadership and apply it to the micro level, it fundamentally defined how families and intimate relationships were traditionally formed.
And that brings us to the core of Riker's social critique, which explores what he explicitly calls red pill relationships, the lost art of courtship, and the absolutely vital, irreplaceable role of fatherhood.
Let's unpack his view on the modern dating scene because it is scathing. He argues that, as a society, we have completely disastrously abandoned the concept of traditional courtship.
Courtship used to be a process where a man intentionally pursued a woman with the clear, stated intention of long-term commitment, family building, and marriage.
Today, he argues, that has been entirely replaced by a superficial, highly disposable hookup culture, and he places a massive amount of the blame squarely on the algorithm-driven dating apps.
He says these apps foster what he identifies as red flag relationships.
These are connections based entirely on fleeting physical attraction, perfectly curated photos, and instant gratification, rather than the hard work of discovering shared values and long-term compatibility.
The cascading consequences of this breakdown in traditional family formation are incredibly stark, and Riker brings the receipts. The text cites deeply sobering data directly from the U.S. Census Bureau.
Currently, nearly 1/4 of all children in the United States live in a home without a father present.
Riker correlates this massive, unprecedented absence of masculine authority in the home directly to our current societal decay. He notes the statistical reality that fatherless homes overwhelmingly lead to higher juvenile crime rates, significantly increased teen pregnancies, and disastrously poor academic performance among both young boys and girls.
He argues you cannot remove the foundational pillar of the family and expect the house to stand.
So, if the apps are broken and the family unit is collapsing, what is Riker's actionable solution for the men listening?
He introduces the concept of red pill relationships. Now, it's important to clarify how he uses this term. When Riker talks about the red pill, he isn't just referencing the internet slang or the Matrix metaphor. He specifically defines it here as a conscious, intentional return to active courtship.
It means a man taking the absolute initiative. It means he steps up to set the tone, the boundaries, and the pace of the relationship. He's impassive. He doesn't just see where things go.
He ensures from day one that the relationship is built from the ground up on shared moral values, mutual respect, and a deep biological understanding of those complementary roles we discussed earlier, rather than just matching on a digital app and hoping for the best.
To reinforce why this traditional dynamic is so crucial, Riker quotes Dr. Jordan Peterson directly from the text. Peterson states, "It's quite difficult to construct a viable society if there are no gender differences whatsoever. That complementarity led to a societal stability."
Riker uses the psychological framework to argue that the cultural archetype of the father must be aggressively restored. Historically, the father is not just a second mother.
He is the physical protector, the primary economic provider, and crucially, the loving but firm disciplinarian who introduces the child to the harsh realities and rules of the outside world.
But this is where Riker points the finger again. He argues that modern feminism's relentless, decades-long push for perfectly shared, absolutely identical child-rearing responsibilities has violently blurred these necessary lines.
It has caused massive systemic confusion for both the parents trying to navigate it and the children trying to understand their boundaries. Men today literally don't know if they're supposed to be the stoic disciplinarian enforcing the rules or the soft, permissive best friend.
Therefore, Riker's message to you, the listener, regarding your personal life is totally unambiguous. Men must actively reclaim their traditional role as the definitive head of the household.
He is very careful to frame this. He views this not as an ego-driven power trip or an excuse for tyranny, but as a heavy, exhausting burden of responsibility.
It is a duty that a man must shoulder because it is absolutely necessary to ensure the psychological stability, safety, and future success of the next generation.
But there is a massive catch to this demand for leadership. Riker makes it crystal clear that to successfully lead a family, and by extension a society, a man cannot just point to his gender and demand respect.
He has to actually earn it every single day.
He must cultivate extreme, undeniable personal competence and cold rationality. You can't lead if you don't know where you're going or how to get there.
And that transitions us perfectly into how a man actually builds himself into that leader, the path to resilience, the pursuit of mastery, rationality, and hard skill building.
This is where the book shifts from philosophy to a highly practical manual for living. Riker draws a very stark, unforgiving contrast between the modern male's addiction to instant gratification, scrolling social media for quick dopamine hits, buying cheap things on Amazon, playing video games, and the lifelong, disciplined, often painful pursuit of actual mastery.
He strongly advocates for men to log off and learn specific, highly tangible, real-world skills. He doesn't just mean getting a middle management degree.
Right. The book lists mastering things like intricate woodworking, high-level finance, complex coding languages, advanced car mechanics, the art of high-stakes negotiation, and even classical artistry.
The anecdote of Joe the welder really stuck with me because it perfectly illustrates this point.
We all know a guy like Joe, right? Joe wasn't a guy with a fancy Ivy League degree hanging on his wall. He wasn't the most traditionally educated or polished man in the room. He didn't speak in corporate buzzwords.
But Joe had spent years, thousands of hours under the hood, mastering the specific, highly difficult physical skill of complex welding.
Because he possessed true, undeniable mastery over physical matter, he was always in demand. He could walk into any factory, any shipyard, and instantly command respect and a premium wage.
Joe possessed something real, something that couldn't be outsourced or digitized, and that made him virtually bulletproof to economic downturns. It gave him a quiet, masculine dignity that the mid-level email job manager often feels he is entirely lacking.
And Riker emphasizes that this rigorous pursuit of mastery must extend to the mind just as much as the hands. He spends a lot of time contrasting rational, logic-based, long-term decision-making with the disastrous results of emotional bias.
To illustrate the danger of emotional thinking, he highlights the 17th century tulip mania in Holland.
This was a period where grown men emotionally invested their entire life savings, their homes, and their families' futures into incredibly overvalued tulip bulbs purely because of a speculative, crowd-driven frenzy.
When the bubble burst, they lost absolutely everything. Riker frames this as a catastrophic failure of male rationality.
He contrasts this historical disaster with modern figures like Warren Buffett, positioning Buffett as the absolute pinnacle of long-term, value-based, cold, logical decision-making that completely ignores emotional market panics and the madness of crowds.
And part of mastering your mind, according to the book, is overcoming what behavioral economists call the sunk cost fallacy.
We've all been there, and Riker speaks directly to the men listening who might be trapped in it right now. You invest years of your life or thousands of dollars into a highly toxic romantic relationship or a business venture that is clearly bleeding out, and you refuse to walk away simply because of what you've already put into it.
Your pride and your emotions keep you chained to a sinking ship. Riker says men must rigorously train their minds to ruthlessly identify these cognitive biases. A rational man must learn to cut his losses logically and walk away, rather than staying trapped by emotion and pride.
All of this skill building and mental training feeds directly into Riker's foundational definition of resilience. He wants the listener to understand a core truth. Resilience is not a genetic lottery ticket. It is not something you are simply born with.
It is a muscle that must be repeatedly torn and rebuilt. It is a learned practice.
To illustrate the mechanics of resilience, he uses historical examples of people who faced crushing, humiliating defeats but practiced the discipline of moving forward.
He points to Winston Churchill's early disastrous political and military failures, like Gallipoli, which would have ended a lesser man.
He points to J.K. Rowling's numerous spirit-crushing manuscript projections before finally publishing Harry Potter.
And he highlights the incredible, almost unbelievable story of Arunima Sinha, who climbed Mount Everest, the tallest peak in the world, after tragically losing a leg. These are people who weaponize their trauma into forward momentum.
To build this level of unbreakable resilience, Riker discusses what he calls the ultimate meta-skill learning, exactly how to learn. If you can master the art of acquiring complex new information quickly, you can adapt to literally any economic collapse, industry shift, or personal disaster.
But he also makes a very important caveat. You cannot do it entirely alone as a lone wolf. A man needs to actively build what he calls a fortress of support.
This means cultivating a tight, thoroughly vetted circle of male camaraderie and true brotherhood. When a man inevitably faces a massive professional failure or a devastating personal tragedy, this brotherhood is the absolute essential safety net required to cushion the fall, hold him accountable, and help him rebuild the foundation.
Which brings us to a critical unifying realization in Riker's framework. Mastery of the mind and mastery of tangible skills must absolutely, without exception, be paired with mastery of the physical body and one's surrounding environment.
You cannot have a strong mind in a weak, deteriorating vessel. This leads us directly into our final area of analysis: self-reliance through absolute physical fitness, financial independence, and ecological sustainability.
Riker does not mince words in this section at all. He views physical fitness as an absolute, non-negotiable pillar of baseline masculinity.
He writes, "A man's body is his vehicle. If you let your vehicle fall apart through sheer laziness, terrible diet, and lack of discipline, you cannot physically or morally lead anyone."
He goes into the biology of it, detailing how rigorous, heavy resistance training releases necessary endorphins, builds undeniable, calloused mental toughness, and frankly, instantly commands primitive respect from society the moment you walk into a room. People instinctively respect physical competence.
But he doesn't stop at the boundaries of the physical body. Riker challenges men to look outward at their environment and carefully calculate the actual long-term ecological cost of their daily consumer choices.
The text uses a very relatable example of a spring sale for fast fashion clothing. Buying cheap, disposable goods shipped halfway across the world might feel like an economic win for your wallet in the moment. But Riker argues it relies on highly unsustainable environmental practices and often deeply exploitative labor. It is a weak, short-term choice.
This is where Riker has a really fascinating paradigm-shifting take. He doesn't frame environmental sustainability as some modern, politically liberal talking point that conservative men should reject.
Instead, he flips the script entirely. He positions men as the historical pioneers, the original stewards of the land, and the builders of enduring civilization.
Therefore, he argues that masculine men must now step up and reclaim their rightful role as the ultimate sustainability leaders. Real men build things to last generations. They don't buy garbage that breaks in a week.
To execute this level of leadership effectively, Riker states a man must possess deep, functional literacy in 3 critical areas that govern modern society: finance, medicine, and the law.
Riker ties financial literacy directly to the concept of ultimate personal freedom. This means truly understanding the complex dynamics of real estate leverage, understanding how the stock market actually functions beyond just gambling on trends, and grasping the fundamental macroeconomic laws of supply and demand.
If you truly understand how money moves, you have the actual power to protect your family from economic ruin and state dependency.
And his points on medical and legal literacy are just as vital for maintaining total autonomy. Riker gives the highly practical example of knowing basic rental, contract, and property laws.
If you are legally literate, you won't lose your home, your business, or your assets to a predatory agreement or a bad partnership. You don't have to constantly rely on expensive lawyers to translate the world for you.
Furthermore, deeply understanding how your own body works, understanding basic ancestral nutrition, human physiology, and biomechanics massively reduces your total reliance on the pharmaceutical and medical establishment. It creates true, uncompromising self-sufficiency.
You aren't constantly outsourcing your survival to the state or to corporations you are owning it entirely. Riker concludes this point by stating that every single dollar you spend is a direct vote for the kind of future you want to live in.
By investing smartly, buying assets, and utterly rejecting cheap, disposable, low-quality consumerism, men exert their natural, historical leadership on a massive, global, and ecological scale.
As we finally bring this exhaustive deep dive to a close, let's take a moment to summarize the massive scope of key takeaways from Conrad Riker's The Vulnerable Vessel.
The ultimate overarching message directed at you, the listener, is a powerful call to totally reject the modern pervasive myth that emotional vulnerability somehow equates to actual power or respect.
Riker is asking you to look at history and biology without flinching. He asks you to embrace biological realities, to recognize the absolute necessity of complementary gender roles where men and women bring different strengths to the table, and to willingly shoulder the heavy, difficult burden of traditional masculine responsibilities.
By doing so, he argues passionately, you can build a highly resilient, deeply fulfilling, and historically grounded life. And again, as we stated at the beginning, we have presented these complex arguments impartially today to ensure you have a complete, objective, and detailed picture of the author's worldview so you can make your own determinations.
It is a massive amount of information to process, and it directly, unapologetically challenges almost all of the mainstream narratives we are fed through media and institutions every single day.
It certainly does disrupt the modern consensus. And before we officially sign off, I want to leave you with a final, highly provocative thought to chew on. This builds directly upon Riker's themes of biological reality, but looks forward toward the technological horizon.
Think about this deeply. If our modern captured institutions continue to relentlessly push for absolute, identical, interchangeable roles between men and women in every facet of life, what exactly happens to the fundamental design of our future technologies?
If artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms, and the future digital infrastructures of our global society are being programmed right now by developers to completely ignore and erase the biological and psychological differences that have defined all of human history, are we actively building a technological future that fundamentally, at its core, misunderstands the human condition?
Wow. That is an incredibly chilling thought to end on. A society entirely managed by an AI that doesn't understand the fundamental biological difference between a mother and a father, or the necessity of masculine protection.
If you found this deep dive valuable, and if you want us to keep bringing you these intense, unfiltered, ultra-long breakdowns of the most important cultural books of our time, please do us a huge favor, hit that like button, and subscribe to the channel right now.
And if this conversation sparked your curiosity and you want to read the source material for yourself to see exactly how Riker constructs these historical arguments and philosophies page by page, go check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books right now to buy the ebook, The Vulnerable Vessel.
Absolutely. And don't forget to follow the author directly, Conrad Riker, at Substack for more of his daily unfiltered insights into masculinity and culture. Thank you so much for joining us on this massive deep dive. It has been an incredibly eye-opening conversation. Take care of yourselves, stay resilient, and we will see you on the next one.